Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about cybersecurity and more specifically about the role of human factor, but also the way internal auditors may challenge the existing practices. I am Pascal van den Busch and I am the ECIA Secretary General, and I welcome you on behalf of ECIA but also all its member national institutes in the different European countries. I propose that today we have a small little trip to Europe, and we will first start with Paris, where Guy-Philippe Goldstein, who is an advisor to PwC, but also a lecturer at the School of Economy Warfare, will tell us why human factor is so important. So Guy-Philippe, bonjour et bienvenue.
Merci, bonjour Pascal.
After this small trip to Paris, we will go to the Netherlands and we will go to Utrecht, where Twan Oosterveld, who is the Group Internal Audits, IT Audits and Security, of Psycho will tell us about best practices and share his best practices. So, goedemiddag, Twan. And
goedemiddag. Goedemiddag. Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here. Thank you, Pascal.
Welcome. We will go to the south, and first we will make a small stop at Barcelona. So, Marc Solé, who is the operational and IT risk auditor of Banco Sabadell, will tell us about his experience about cybersecurity. So, Marc, buenos días y bienvenido.
Buenos días. Good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And last but not the least, we will finish with Milano, Italy, where Luca Laguardia, who is the head of internal audit of Borsa Italiana, but also a member of the AIIA Cybersecurity Observatory, will share with us his experience. So Luca, ciao and benvenuto. There is, I think...
Thank you, Pascal. Ciao, and good morning to everyone.
So I do not believe that there is any doubt that cybersecurity is a hot topic, and this has been confirmed recently with the publication of the last edition of Risk in Focus. So for those that are not familiar, this is the 10th edition, and this is really the guidance about what chief audit executives should take in their audit plan for the next year. It is based on survey, but also on interviews with experts, with member of audit committee and with audit manager. You can find this publication on the ECIA website, but also on your local institute website. And you have two versions, a full version, a long version, but also a summary that we called board briefing. And this year, for the first time, we have decided to also make a deep dive on some of the risks and to define how we can audit this risk, because they are new or because there are some original way that we can follow. And this is exactly the context for today's discussion. It's about how to audit cybersecurity, taking into consideration the human factor. So this is our objective for today. And I would also like to tell you that at European level, here in Brussels, another small stop in Belgium, it is also hot on the agenda of the regulator, because we all know that we have the NIS directive since 2016 now, but this directive is under review by the European Commission. They have launched a consultation recently, and we do expect to get the full report assessment beginning of next year. So let's hope that risk management will be in this revision and will be in the top of the way to increase the resilience towards cybersecurity in the future. Participants, of course, you will also have a chance to give us your thoughts by raising your hand, and you have a button on the down of your screen where you can ask to get the word and to be able to discuss with us. You will have this opportunity right at the end of the panel discussion. You can also, for those who are a little bit more shy and just want to write some questions, this is also possible. You can use the Q&A session that you find down also on the screen to raise your question, and we will do our best to handle them after the panel. So now let's go to Paris, not far away from Brussels, and let's ask to Guy Philippe why human factor is so important in cybersecurity. So Guy Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pascal, and delighted to be in this very open environment. And let's get down directly to business. As we can see in the next coming slide, indeed, as you mentioned, we see that at the EU level, we see that within actually the ECEEA, cyber has become a big focus. It has already been started for the last 3 years to be identified by all the experts part of the ECEEA as one of the top 3 corporate risks. And then we've seen actually a switch or shift, if I may, actually this year, where actually it's been identified as the #1 corporate risk. So indeed a big issue. And we see that with our community of auditors and internal controllers. But of course, if we look beyond that, if I say look at what we can see with the World Economic Forum, with their own global risk survey, we've seen that, say, 10 years ago, no one was really talking much about cyber. And then over the last 5 years, it started to inching up among the top 5 risks. And now it is definitely one of the top 5 risks. And actually, when you look and ask at the World Economic Forum, not only to all the gurus and panelists, but actually to the business leaders, for them, your business leaders in the UK, in France, in Germany, all across Europe, indeed, cyber has become the top #1 risk. And the intriguing thing here is that when you deal a bit with cyber, which is one of the things I do, you know that any bad hackers, when they are going to develop and exploit vulnerabilities against their targets, at some point they are going to use what they call social engineering. And social engineering is actually trying to use the human vulnerability, all the human risk, to try to get a better access to the corporate networks. What is intriguing is that actually that issue of human factor has been really much at the forefront of the bad guys for at least the last 20, 30 years. And it started to actually be understood by the good guys and all the ethical hackers. And that is actually what you may see in the next slide. Where actually we're going to talk about a couple of important figures. But if you look on the left part, so these are figures from IBM asking the question, what is the percentage of cyber incidents where human factor is a contributor, human error is a contributing factor? And in that survey from 2015, I believe, actually 95% of the cyber incident had that human factor as a contributing incident. And you have actually the same level when, say, you ask in the UK to the Internet Commission Office, which will state very recently that human error is 90% of the time an element of a cyber incident. Or even if you look beyond civilian cybersecurity to military cybersecurity, and 1.5 years ago at audition at the US Congress, you had people from Pentagon who said that actually 90% of the issues with military cybersecurity is linked to human error. So you see, in the civilian world, in the military world, you have a converging view that indeed 90% plus of issues is linked to that human errors. So what is this human error? Maybe simple things such as double clicking on a link where you should have not clicked, the use or default username or password, things that you should have changed or which are too easy to guess, or even that you've lost your laptops or mobile devices, or that you've sent data to people you should not have sent to, or that, and you see that more and more with cloud issues now, the bad configuration of systems or poor patch management. You see that, as I mentioned, in civilian issues, when you deep dive even in industrial control and security issues, so areas that should be better protected. And net, you have even surveys that shows that not only it's very, very frequently there, but even in a majority of cases, it is the contributing factor. So it's very interesting then to see why and why at the individual level, at the employee level, which is what we see in the next slide. And basically, we have about 3 factors. One is that you are unaware that you are going to make mistakes. And this is linked to your own cognitive limitations. And the cognitive limitations, it's because either you're tired, it's either the start of the week and you have to relaunch the whole business process, or it is at the very end of the week, the Friday afternoon. And it's very frequent, actually, that the attackers are going to send you the wrong emails, either at the start of the week or at the end of the week. And these are facts of life. But then beyond that, you may be in a stressful environment. So stressful environment, you may increase on the short term your productivity and your production, but you know that on the long term, people are indeed going to be even more tired on a cognitive basis, and then you may be more susceptible to this type of mistakes. And then you may actually have in an environment with a crisis, which is what we've seen with the COVID situation, the COVID-19 situation. And that's precisely where you may have situations where you have a new environment, a new digital environment, when you're not properly trained because now you work from home, or you have new information and new alerts, and you don't know which alert is good and which alert is not good. And that's where you're going to make mistakes. So this is the whole group of mistakes that you do, and you're unaware of that. But then you have also, say, the lapses and the errors and the mistakes that you do, and you are actually somehow aware of it, but you think it's not that important. And it's this lack of respect for established protocols. And actually, you have lots of survey that shows that at least half of the employees, because they're not aware that it's that bad, they are going to do bad things. And then you have also a last bucket of what we may call inside the threat. So these are people who are really aware within your organization that they want to do bad things. That happens. The amount of that is more limited than what we've seen, across survey, maybe 10, 20, 30% of all the bad stuff. And that's, of course, another issue. So that's what you see at the employee level. But if you look at the executive level, at the leadership level, which is what we see in the next slide, you see also that people make mistakes because, again, they may be unaware that bad stuff is happening. And they do that because maybe they have not properly understood how impactful at the business level that cyber risk may be. And then whenever bad things happen, they may think, okay, but it's not that important. I may take a bit some time. And then, but the issue is that when you're a crisis, the main thing is to be quick in the response. And when you're not, then your company is going to lose a lot of money on the table. And this is what happened to those 4 people that you see on the screen, which are top executives in the US, in the US and in Australia, and people who had to be fired, unfortunately, because they did not understand how bad the situation was and they didn't react in time. So that's, we've seen the employee, we've seen the leadership level. Now, if we move at the overall human organization level, and that's the last slide. So we see that there again, we have a couple of issues, both with the state of preparedness and, of course, the importance of culture. So I'll start with the state of preparedness for this human organization. And we see here that we still have human organizations which are still not that prepared to that type of shocks. This is one example you see on the left part of the screen is a survey that comes from IBM Ponemon, and that asks, how many of your companies have developed a robust incident response plan? And on that survey, about 80% of companies interrogated in France, but it's about the same number across Europe, didn't have a robust incident response plan. Either it was only partial, or sometimes they didn't have any. So if you don't even have a plan to respond to incidents, then your level of preparation is like 0. But even the 20% who had a planned response to incidents, half of them did not test them. And that's a critical issue. It's great to have your stack of papers that is your plan that is going to tell you what to do when you have a big issue. But it's very important that that is being tested in simulation in exercises. And very often it's not the case. So that's the state of preparedness. And then siding to that is the overall culture that we see in the company. It's the last point. And there, I go back to actually, I retreat myself behind Eugene Habiger, who used to be the commander-in-chief of Stratcommand in the US, a great guy who developed nuclear strategic forces in the US and stated that good security is, okay, 20% equipment, but indeed 80% people. And here I'm going to restress some of the elements we already talked about. It depends on the level of stress that you may have in the overall organization, but also, let's talk about if protocols are indeed apply, but also if protocols are too complex, because if they're too complex, they're not going to be applied. If there's enough investment in training, which is a critical element, because you don't create culture out of thin air, you need to invest into that. And then, if we have the type of culture, which, for example, in Nordic countries, you may call just culture, so that whenever people make mistakes, they are not going to, and they make mistakes in good faith, they're not going to be punished, but we're going to listen to them to get all the information so that any issues in training, in the way things are understood, is properly shared, and then you can make a more resilient organization with the right culture. So, in a nutshell, elements which are going to be explained further in details in the new report. But I believe a good introduction to now our floor conversation with all our panelists.
Thank you, Guy-Philippe, for this very inspiring introduction. And I'm sure that the 510 people that are listening to this webinar are now convinced that human factor is very important. And before launching the panel, we would like to hear from them what is their experience and make sure that we can share it with everyone. So while I am introducing Toine Oosterveld, who will start the panel discussion, I will ask my colleague, please, to launch the poll and ask to all the participants to give their opinion and experience. So, what do you consider being the biggest challenge when you deal with cybersecurity? Is it using the behave securely, or the complexity of technology that's involved, the complexity of security policies, or knowing the attackers and their motives? So please give us your opinion and we will share with everyone the results. While you are all participating, let me introduce Toine. So Toine, the question that we have for you is that cyber is not new. We were mentioning that it was already in the top 3 risks in 2017 in the risk in focus. We know that all the local countries have their own regulation. Europe has its own regulation. Everybody is working on it. And still, there are a lot of major attacks. There are a lot of issues about cybersecurity. We have seen with COVID-19 that it's really a big issue still in many organizations. How can we explain that? And to help you, maybe the feeling from the audience, and we have a mixed feeling because we can see that the complexity of the technology involved has 27%, the complexity of security policy 6%, followed by the knowing of the attackers and their motive. So what do you think? What is your experience? And please let us know. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you, Pascal. And well, it's interesting to see the numbers here. I think there is no wrong or right answer, but indeed it was to be expected that people would choose and would have a preference for users to behave securely. Some of us work in a bank and we have to know your customer policy. Sometimes it's also good to know who's your enemy who's after you. That helps. And indeed, as Guy-Philippe also mentioned, the human element, stress, there's a lot going on. So the human element dealing with policies, dealing with the technology, that's all a big challenge that we have to deal with. Well, we all know that cybersecurity, cyber attacks will stay. The threats are not slowing down, and the best efforts of the employees are really not keeping up. And of course, that is not a doom scenario. There is some positive developments as well. We are now, as what we call it, in the fourth revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, and everything is going at a rapid pace. And it's not only technology or digital, but it's also physical and biological, and it's all interfering with each other. And we know cyber risks, well, they are here to stay. And whenever we're exploring new opportunities, and of course that's all going faster and faster, there's going to be a tremendous impact on the cyber risk. So the cyber risk profile is changing continuously, and that's definitely something as an auditor we should be aware of. I said that maybe there's a kind of a doom scenario that we cannot keep up. Well, there's definitely some good positive notes to make. If we look at some positive developments, then we see on the human side, there's increased attention and involvement. We see that top management and board members, well, we also saw that is because some of the very senior people, they lost their jobs because they didn't act properly. Well, they're doing that. And of course, that's part of the culture. But we also see that regulators are doing the same. That doesn't make it easier because sometimes you have to deal with different legislation. It's quite challenging, but it's definitely getting the attention that it should have. People, I mean, we're all getting more aware of cybersecurity. Also, the end user. It's a positive note. There's also a negativity to it because it's a lot of information, and we have to make sure that people are absorbing it in a proper way. We see a lot of technical changes. We see, of course, that the environment, that there's more tools to help us with intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. So that's all very positive. But at the same time, of course, that can also be a negative factor because it's getting more complex. And the complexity is definitely hard to deal with, not only for end users, but especially for people who administer it. Security measures, there's more and more measures, but sometimes they're very hard to understand. And then people don't follow it, intentionally or unintentionally, and mostly it's unintentionally. We see also that sometimes there's so many measures that people think, well, let me not follow it here and find a workaround, because then they can do the work in a more efficient way, but bypassing security. So all these things, of course, as an auditor, we should be aware of. We really have to understand human nature whenever we're going to do an audit on cybersecurity. On the human side, we see that people become more sociable in the office, but also outside of the office, and maybe reveal a little bit of ourselves too much. We see an increased workload, as Guy-Philippe mentioned, the COVID-19 working from home. Some of us feel quite alone. That increases the stress level. We feel maybe an increased workload because we feel guilty. We're working at home. We think we have to do a little bit of extra work. Management style. If there's not a just culture, well, what's going on in an organization like that? So a cultural assessment is something that is crucial for us as internal auditors to do as well. All in all, when we face these challenges and we see that there is good things going on and there's bad things going on, for us as auditors, it's very important that we pay attention to the human element. And that's actually a very interesting and challenging side. On the other side, of course, it's also maybe the hardest and the less tangible component there is. But the good news is there's more and more guidance coming, and there's more and more opportunities to get familiar with this ourselves. Pascal?
Thank you very much.
Can I go back to you?
So I would like now to go to Italy and to discuss a little bit about culture, because Guy-Philippe mentioned that security culture is also a very important aspect, and I fully agree with him. So Luca, do you have particular aspect about culture in your audit plan?
Hi, Pascal. Thanks for your question. For sure, yes. I mean, if I pose this question to everyone, saying if culture is important, especially to prevent, cybersecurity risk, my answer will be yes. I mean, we saw also in the previous pages presented by Philippe about, for instance, the National Security Agency in the US. So they say that 80% of a cybersecurity crisis comes because of, people as issues in their culture. Maybe it is, I don't know, an hyperlink that you click. You saw in the past cases of ransomware, when attackers encrypt your files, and then companies should pay a huge amount of money in order to decrypt these files. But what I faced in my experience was especially the COVID-19. After that, there was a challenge for our auditor, for myself and my team. It was understanding if COVID-19 will have, had impacts on the way we are working on cybersecurity. Especially you have to think that from, one day, from a few days, you found all the company stay outside working from home. This exposes the company to big risk. I could imagine too many risks, like, I don't know, using of equipments, for instance, not authorized. Just talking about video calls, you can use different tools. And so it's important to understand which tools are used. Printing from home, making, conferences, meetings, board of directors. So it happened also to me to participate in board of directors, staying at home. So there was the risk that confidentiality is not ensured in this case. And so how to do this? And second, also the phishing. We saw, during the pandemic months, in these last 7 months, a lot of cases of phishing, of ransomware, and all these, I can say, maybe not all, but many of them can be generated by human culture and by bad behaviors of people. So as auditor, what I think to do? Cybersecurity was already in my mind, because in the past, for sure, being in the financial sectors, you can imagine payments, trading, all these things. So cybersecurity is very important. And so, the first of all was to train the people of my team to be aware about cybersecurity. And so first measure taken was to train the people within the audit team, so that everyone, also business auditor, are trained about cybersecurity. And then what you can do with your audit plan, going back to your question, Pascal, I think it's important to check the culture in general, so the governance. I would expect, for instance, if the board of directors, is not in charge for this issue, then it's difficult. Then this is treated in a correct way by all the employees in a company. So I would expect that maybe a good audit could be on the governance, to check if there is, a diversity in our board of directors, if there is the possibility to have experts on IT subject and cybersecurity. Interesting on that is that now also the regulators ask us, in the financial sectors, to banks, to financial institutions, to have the diversity within the boards. So we have people with different experiences, and especially they say, but you have people that are experienced in IT subjects. Sometimes you see people, they say, it is too difficult, it is a matter that should be discussed with IT skills person, with technological people, but this is not the matter. I think that we needed to have a board of directors that are experienced on cybersecurity. And so having also partnership and directors who participate in the board of directors coming from risk department, from IT department, like for instance, the chief information security officer, or the business continuity coordinator, in order to report to the boards the threats and all the measures taken in order to avoid cybersecurity. So first of all, the governance. But then when you have the right governance, you have also to check if this governance spread around the company. So how you can do this? Maybe you can check the policies. So the company normally act using policies and guidelines. Going back to COVID-19, all these people at home working from home, it means to have put in place some policies that tell you how to deal, how to behave, how to manage confidential information. So all the measures that should be taken. So it means to have all the policies in place, procedures, but also to have performed a lot of training to these people. So as an auditor, I would like to see if there are some trainings, for instance, on phishing. So I would expect that the company will send fake phishing to employees to check if they are aware about this risk. So how many people click on this fake hyperlink and can create a disruption in the business? So policies, training, and these are very important. And second, as I also heard before, incident management. I mean, also we can have a lot of incidents in the company, but it's important how these incidents are managed. So we are dealing with the root causes of these incidents. So it's important that the company has a good process of incident management. Also, I think it's also a matter of sharing these incidents between. So I don't want to see companies that hide incidents or they keep these incidents just for small departments or for some departments. But incidents should be shared in all the committees, and you have the possibility to understand the root causes in order to put in place better measure to do this. And then I would say also the fourth things I would do is also to be sure that there are, I mean, especially in the resilience plans, I mean, I was just talking about disaster recovery and the business continuity plans, scenarios that are deal with this kind of problems. So the problems of maybe culture that can originate some disruption because of cybersecurity events, how to manage these, how to deal with the communication outside. So this is, I mean, related to culture, also this one. We can have a very good company, maybe managing the risk, but a very bad company in managing communication outside to our clients, to the markets, to all our stakeholders. And so it's important that also cybersecurity incidents are managed correctly outside the company with all our stakeholders. I think this is what we can put in place as a good auditors. Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you very much. In the guidance, we mentioned that companies should prepare themselves for the worst, but it would be good to know what you do in your company to be prepared for the worst, and also if you have specific action regarding human factors for that. So let's do a tandem between the Holland, the Netherlands, and Spain. So Tuan and Mark, the floor is yours.
Okay, Barcelona is starting. Okay, so
go ahead.
Okay, taking it, I would say more on the practical side. I would say that when we conduct audits to assess how the company is prepared against certain vector attacks or risk from inside, and many of those, as Guy Philippe was mentioning before, such as phishing, CEO fraud, or any variety of social engineering, are using mechanisms that exploit the human factor. So a way we are contributing from an audit approach perspective is by reviewing the existing process and controls, assuming that human errors will happen due to a careless user, a human mistake, or whatever is the case. So when we audit, we focus, of course, on the protection measures against a threat, but as well on the existing capabilities to detect the attack, respond, and hopefully not, but finally recover if needed. And that means somehow reviewing the systems and processes to be prepared for the worst. In our case, and here we have some representative in the banking industry, this scenario to manage the human factor gets quite complex because the human factor potentially can act in our customers that use digital banking. And of course, they can be targeted by a phishing or malware or whatever. Also, the human factor can act in our employees. As I said before, they can just make a mistake or circumvent a policy, but as well to third parties personnel as part of the, say, the extended bank concept. So in our audit approaches, we review that solutions and deployments are built robust enough against human failures from a process and a technological perspective to provide a good level of protection upfront. That, for example, would be, and the regulation is also enforcing, to use measures such as the double factor authentications, but having in consideration as well that those protections can fail for many reasons, including, of course, the human failure, a vulnerability not remediated timely, a change management error, or due to those careless users that, don't forget, anyone here, you will always have in the company. Okay, so that means that the processes, as far as possible, need to be prepared to detect any suspicious activity, like a wire transfer to a certain territory, and be able to respond, like stop the transaction and recover. And hopefully this is not the case, but if the attack succeeds and that goes into a major impact in the company, then the company needs to be capable to react and have proper crisis management procedures in place. And I think that, Tuan, you can provide some insights about this, right?
Yes, Mark, I can. And let me do that. Well, thank you. Let's go to crisis management. And of course, with the outbreak of the pandemic last year, it was a personal crisis for a lot of people and also for a lot of organizations. But to many organizations, this was indeed an incident, not a crisis. Not everything makes up for a crisis. And as auditors, we give assurance about business continuity, incident management, and crisis management. And of course, we need to make sure that being prepared for the worst, that we are prepared. But can you ever be prepared for the worst? And I think what is important for internal audit is also that we are not making or forcing the organization, or we should maybe even tell the organization, you can never be prepared for each single threat. It's important that you look at scenarios, that you look at things that are well, realistic, that are likely to happen, but certain things are not likely to happen and could have a very big impact. So what is more important? And that's the human aspect, that it's the flexibility or even the adaptability of an organization whenever an incident happens that they really didn't cater for, that at least they know they have a mechanism in place, maybe even already a natural tendency because they've been exercising this so often, that they can actually deal with the situation much better than organizations who have very good plans, but they haven't really the flexibility. So don't take me wrong, exercising is crucial. You should always do that, and we should always make the organization aware that they should do it. But on top of that, it's very important that the organization has kind of this natural ability that they can also think outside the box and deal with the situation at hand. And well, what are the roles? What are our contribution as internal auditors? Well, we can help set the tone in the organization and make people aware of the importance of crisis management. We can help them in identifying the myriad of external and internal risks, because there's so many, and there's where we can help as risk professionals. Yes, we give assurance about the effectiveness of crisis management on all levels, and we should look at documentation, but we should also look beyond the documentation and at the people themselves, how they work. We should also make sure that there's proper communication, as Luca already mentioned earlier on. Communication is super important, especially in times of crisis. And of course, and that's a typical role as auditors, we should, in due time, assess the quality of the crisis management system. That's crucial to happen. So this is all about humans. And one way, of course, to improve the capability to deal with the unexpected is to conduct cyber exercises, actually. And our, as internal auditors, contribution is to provide an independent view on how prepared a company is to manage a crisis. And Mark, this is an area where you have extensive experience, right? So it would be great to learn more about it.
Yeah, we do have some experience in the company, but cyber exercises certainly rehearse and test your people. Again, that is about human factor and the company processes to deal with a crisis. An internal audit, that's been our case, can play a role in providing an independent view as a third line of defense. I would say that in our experience, that was several years ago, maybe our first contribution was to recommend management to periodically conduct cyber exercises, although nowadays, that is a consolidated practice in the company, and simulacrums are conducted on a regular basis. And you can see a clearly evolvement in both. On one side, in the complexity of the scenario, and on the other side, in the involvement of senior management. So what we have seen from our experience is that by doing these exercises and making them more and more complicated, but probably close to what the real crisis could be, management and business units have become more and more conscious on how complex can be managing a crisis of this nature. So they need to train for dealing with the unexpected. We've seen as well that these exercises provide a motivating learning experience for people whilst checking the strength of crisis management capabilities. So as part of internal audit, what we are doing now is attending to these cyber exercises, and we can provide our independent view on crisis management readiness by assessing if decision-making was clear, if the business was enough prepared upfront to react, and if all the key aspects were addressed. We do have a kind of framework with several aspects that we want to independently assess how they are being managed during the exercise. And hopefully you can see them in the slide, but basically helps us in answering several questions and how that has been managed during the exercise. And many of those relate to people. So how people within the company were able to provide an integrated and coordinated response considering technology, operational, and business aspects, where again, people responsible for running the process able to assess and respond to potential impacts on customers, employees, and third parties. Also are very key, the legal and regulatory aspects and communication with the stakeholders. And finally, and maybe more pervasive, did the organization act according to the governance and risk management policies, procedures? So a contribution from internal audit. I think that internal audit has usually a broad and transversal view of the organization and has a good capability to see cross impacts and how areas and people have interacted to manage the crisis. So in these simulacrums, internal audit can provide very good inputs on how the company and their people have developed, and if there are still areas with potential room for improvement. But just to finish, as far as possible, you never want to get to the point of having to manage a crisis, and promoting a security culture is key, isn't it, Tuan?
Yeah, it definitely is. Thank you, Mark. Well, and actually, this is we're talking about cybersecurity, and I think we've only been talking about humans. If you Google on cybersecurity, it's all about technology, and it's actually you only find a limited number of definitions where actually the human element is addressed, and that's why I think this webinar is great, because really it is all about the human. And of course, if you look at that picture, the weakest link, actually you could say that the weakest link is the human. But let's not forget, technology is built by humans. Attackers are humans. So actually, the human is everything at the same time. But indeed, it's the culture of an organization is crucial for preventing, or actually, let's not say preventing, but at least to make sure that the vulnerability will become less prone to attackers. And despite the wealth of preventative measures that we're taking, the employees remain one of the costliest vectors in a number of data breaches and incidents. And they are really increasing, and you can read it everywhere. So what's our role in internal audit? Well, how should we provide assurance about a culture? Culture is a very intangible. And of course, not every organization is as culturally aware. And talking about culture sometimes even makes people, well, laugh a little bit because they don't feel at ease. Well, maybe that should already say something. There's not a lot of guidance, unfortunately, but things are developing. And well, for my experience, if you really would like to create a risk-aware culture, and that's important as an auditor, and yeah, in some organizations that are mature, our role is easier, we provide assurance on. If it's not, as an auditor, we have also a responsibility to help the organization to embrace it. And of course, it all starts with the human risk factors. What can humans do wrong, intentionally or unintentionally? And based on that, we need to change behavior of the people. And yeah, that has to be planned. Once you've done that, you need to make sure that you prepare a plan and that you assign resources to it. And yeah, that can be as simple as classroom training, but it can also be webinars, it could be exercises, and everything can be included. And of course, you have to deliver that to the people. And the crux is that we really do that in an adaptive, flexible way. Nothing is more terrible than if you are already quite security aware, you get all the basic stuff, because actually it could be counterproductive. So that makes it even more challenging, because you think, okay, we're doing a lot. Well, sometimes you can do too much. So it's very important to keep that right balance. And well, mistakes, it was already mentioned earlier, the just culture, if you do it with the best, with good faith, then it should be forgiven. And like famous Winston Churchill said, all men make mistakes, but only wise men learn from their mistakes. And creating a culture like that is very important. And I think there's where we as internal auditors can make a difference. I'd like to conclude with that and give the floor back to you, Pascal.
Yeah, thank you, Tuan. So time is running, and I would like to suggest to Luca to share with us what is his experience about integrating the human factor while auditing cyber risk, because we noticed when we were preparing the guidance that there is little publication about this subject. So thanks, Guy Philippe, he helped us on that. But what is your concrete experience and maybe your recommendation, Luca?
Yes, I mean, my recommendation, I was just talking before about communication with the company. So for me, it's very important to be part of the company. So participate in all the management committees, participate as an advisor. So you have to put your people, I mean, audit people within the committees. So everyone should be present, especially in I don't know, in the technological committees, in the management committees, so that we can, bring our voice to these committees to highlight the possible risk that we are facing with some actions instead of others. And second tips can be also, stay connected with our peers in the associations. So it's important to be present in the associations. I have some people of my team that are present in other associations in different topics, but it is a way, to gain experience, to share ideas, to be focused more on this kind of risk, but also to have new ideas, how to deal with the issues and the problems that you can face in the company. And the last point I would say is also to have a constant relationship with second line of defense. In financial institutions, in banks, there is risk management and compliance. And we have always a good discussion with the risk management and compliance to understand, the problems, the issues, and to face better all this. Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you very much, Luca. So before going to another poll, I would like maybe to ask to Guy Philippe if he would like to add some points that we have not covered during the panel discussion that you feel are important in the guidance.
Yes,
that
very
have
briefly.
helped us to write. So Guy Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, very, very briefly. So yeah, just to restate that indeed, in terms of good practices, there are a couple of those in the new risk in focus cybersecurity reports that we just mentioned. And I'll stress one actually discuss with the panel and also with other editors, which is again to test at all the different layers of the organization, something which has been duly stressed by Mark, by Tuan, by Luca, which is extremely important, to test things and to involve the business managers and the business leadership in this test, which is also very critical. And one last point in terms of involvement, and talking back to the issue of leadership, is again, when you do this mapping, this risk mapping exercise, to make sure that indeed, of course, it involves cyber, and if you can, to try to identify what is going to be the value impact, the financial impact of this cyber risk, And that will definitely, put the stress on the business leaders once they understand that there's a lot of money which is at stake. Thanks.
Thank you, Guy-Philippe. So maybe a last word from Spain. So what is your recommendation, Mark?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of good practices, at least that they have been demonstrated effective for us, if that helps the participants. Okay, because sometimes it's difficult to talk about how you audit the security culture and the security awareness. But a couple of things that have worked for us. One is and a good practice that we have found effective and has led us to meaningful discussions with management. It's been enhancing our audits of security process like anti-malware or phishing prevention systems with actual attack simulations, like simulating a phishing. That approach has usually provided much more solid audit results and factual evidence regarding the human factor, and which were the real behaviors of employees that we identified in the audit. Because when you audit security awareness in the company, maybe you want to make sure, and it makes completely sense, that the IT security training and awareness programs are in place, that they provide good coverage and company personnel, that the personnel has passed their test, that the content gets updated periodically with new regulations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and that's good, and that's good. Probably it's what it has to be. But as an auditor, you may also want to assess how people in the company actually behave when they are in front of a social engineering attack. How do they act when they get a request to click on a suspicious link, or if they would execute a file, if that looks from a questionable website? So complementing these audits about security processes with these simulations can really help to provide a much better view on what are the actual behaviors in the company. As a consequence, if there is still room for improvement in security awareness, even that security training was completed timely. Okay, that's something that it has worked for us. And a second good practice, and I'll be brief because I think we're running out of time. It's when you audit, it's good that you focus on the technical aspects, especially that gives usually a quick recommendation or a quick gap on security. That's good, okay? But you don't have to forget about the governance and risk management procedures in place, because both governance, risk management, and technical aspects work in conjunction. And going back again to the human factor, effective risk management procedures mean that management is conscious and willing to understand over the time the risk the company is exposed, and if the control framework is still appropriate for the current situation. And that is very relevant when we face situations of change. And we had a good example with COVID, where many companies had to abruptly change their operating model and run their processes remotely by teleworking. So in this scenario, you expect management to ask themselves, so that means having a strong risk management culture, are still our measures enough? Have the risk increased, or do we have new threats in the current situation? So this risk management culture is key, and internal audit can provide very good inputs as a third line of defense. And we should be able to be effective in challenging the governance risk management practices, as well as the effectiveness of the IT control framework over the time in the different situations that the company can face. And that's what I would like to add from my side. Thanks, Pascal.
Thank you, Mark. So I suggest that you type your question if you have any. And while we are looking at your question, maybe we will launch the final poll to have the view of the audience, because we have now more than 500 people online. So that could be interesting to see what is their experience about culture that has been mentioned by all of you as also a very important point in terms of cybersecurity. So how do you audit cyber culture in your organization? Do you perform a specific audit, or is it just a component of most of your audits related to cybersecurity? When we are waiting for the answer, I will maybe share some logistic details. So as we are running out of time. So we have some questions about CPA attendance certificate. Yes, you can get one. You just have to ask your national institute to get a certificate. We also have some questions about the documentation. Do not worry, you will receive all the documents and by email, but they are also available on the ECIA website. And the recording of this session will be available on the ECIA website at the beginning of next week for all of you. Another question is maybe also related to what's next. And we do propose that we will keep in contact. I told you in the beginning, there will be this assessment of the NIS directive, and cybersecurity will remain next year a hot topic. So we will try to come back to you with maybe another angle to discuss, still original, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So now we have the results. So 29% are doing a specific audit on culture, which is good, but not enough. And 49% mentioned that it's included in their other audits. So now let's go to the questions. And we have one question from one of the participants, which is, what is the difference between incidents and crisis management? Can I ask you, Mark, maybe to give an answer?
Yeah, well, I'd say that incidents, it's the very beginning. I mean, you can have an incident that can have different severity. You can manage, you can react, and that just a state of an incident with a limited impact. But when that gets worse, that incidents may be compromised, it affects other areas of the company that can become a crisis. Then the response is much more complex and it's a much more broad coordination of the company, right? So these are the key difference. Hopefully, an incident you can stop it at the very beginning and doesn't become to a crisis, right? I would say that that's the key difference.
Thank you very much. Tuan, I think you wanted to add something?
No, I fully agree.
Okay, thank you.
For the sake
so let's take a last question before I sum up. How much do you think it's important to have a crisis management procedure that is formalized in a document? So maybe Tuan, can you answer that?
Sorry, I didn't hear it. What formalize the crisis management?
How much do you think it's important to have a crisis management procedure that is formalized in a document?
Well, I think in a mature organization, it has to be formalized. First and foremost, it has to be there. How to deal with the crisis. Communication is crucial. So you need to, depending on the size of the organization, but you need to make sure that you have proper communication included in a crisis management team. And in larger organizations, you could actually engage an external party who deals with communication, because sometimes you have to communicate with your clients or the larger audience. So I would say it's very important you have a plan and you have a formal crisis management plan and you communicate it with everybody in the organization. But I still would say it's also good that in addition to that, you have the right spirit in your crisis management team to deal with every crisis in the best way. I hope that at least answers it. Yeah.
And I see that the human body of everyone is approving what you mentioned. So I will take it as a yes from everyone. I would like now to thank all of you for your participation, for the best practices. And I would also like just to sum up the discussion by saying that I do hope that the more than 500 people are now convinced that human factor is very important when you look at cybersecurity. But as you mentioned, we also have to look at the importance of good and strong corporate governance system, good culture, and good exchange with the other lines of defense, good coordination. So thank you to everyone. I will hope that you will have a very good Christmas break, even though it will be very special. And from Brussels and Belgium, please stay safe and give us your feedback by filling the satisfactory survey that is now on the screen and that you have received. Thank you, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.